raise a family. They have some of the same opportunities that me and my wife.
You agreed that we need to see them as a terrorist organization.
On a private cloud server, yes or no?
To love country, to love God, and to try to do the right thing.
Worked for the nation and the interests of the people. Welcome back to the Fresh Freedom Podcast. As you know, this is a podcast with the freedom-loving freshman members of the House of Representatives, where we provide you a behind-the-scenes look at what's happening in Congress. I'm joined by my fellow conservative freshman member of Congress, Josh Burkeen of Oklahoma. And with us today as a special guest is Warren Davidson. You know, before Congress, Warren was in the 75th Ranger Regiment, Special Operations Forces. He was stationed in Germany, and he witnessed when the Berlin Wall fell. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you guys for the invite. Nice to hang out with y'all.
I didn't know that. To be in Freedom Caucus with you and not know that you were there during the Berlin Wall coming down. That's really
I look
neat.
way younger, don't I?
Wow.
How much of the wall do you have?
Oh, I got a couple chunks. I mean, probably my biggest chunk's about like that, and then I got a couple smaller ones, and then I gave a lot of them away. Yeah.
Were you there when Reagan made the famous speech?
No, so in 1984, Reagan won re-election, won 49 out of 50 states, right? Okay. And he went on a train tour up through Ohio. I was 14 then, and I graduated high school in 88. So 88 was, I graduated high school, and then that fall I could vote in the presidential election. So 89 was when H.W. Bush took office as president. So I enlisted in the Army after high school, but I didn't get over to Germany until George H.W. Bush had become president. Okay. But, when I went over there, we had live ammo on our vehicles. We, prepared to roll out and meet the Soviets. And let's just say, I got to go see the wall like people that were experiencing their first hours of freedom after it came down. And they were not asking for more government, right? They were looking for more freedom. So, same sort of thing the Freedom Caucus is all about, defending freedom. Those guys literally, Mr. Gorbachev didn't tear down the wall, to Reagan's famous line. We didn't tear down the wall. Frankly, the East German people finally tore their own wall down because they found out the truth. And, just a flashback to that, this guy asked me, he could speak some English, I could speak some German, and he's like, is it like this everywhere? And we were in Berlin, so I'm like from Western Ohio, small town Western Ohio. And I was like, no, we get small towns and everything, not everything's big city like this. And he goes, no, the stores are open at night and they have fresh milk. I'm like, yeah, I'm like trying to explain like a 7-Eleven to him or something. And he goes, no, like everyone can go into the stores and the shelves are stocked and like everyone can go in and buy things. And I go, yeah, they want everyone to go in and buy more things so they sell more stuff. And
they stay open.
Because he had only experienced like the party bosses and the officials got to go get the good stuff. And then if they take it, then it's gone. He didn't understand, well, how do they get more stuff in? He had no idea, but he was mind blown because he knew like his whole lifetime up to that point, he had been lied to. I mean, he's just obvious that it was like, wow, everything that they told me was a total lie. So he's over there just totally mind blown, and a couple people with him as well. But yeah, that was definitely something. When you look at the Cold War, and a lot of young people these days don't really know. They never lived when we had the Soviet Union. It's just a period of history, and it's hard to believe. I'm in my 50s now and lived that. But when Reagan said freedom's never more than one generation away from extinction. You look at that moment when it was crystal clear, those people were not looking for more government. They wanted more freedom. Now you look at, we've got colleagues who identify themselves as socialists, democratic socialists, but they want a socialist style government. Crazy.
It is crazy. So your background going from the military to here, what was the transition?
Well, so I got out of the Army in large part because we didn't know what we were going to do after the Cold War. So I was in Ranger Regiment when Al-Qaeda did their first missions. They blew up America's embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. We thought we were going to go do something about that. Bill Clinton decided we weren't. I go from there, get promoted to captain and go to the 101st Airborne Division. And, when I got there, there's just such a difference between what was supposed to be the most combat-ready active duty unit in the infantry with the 101st Airborne Division and what we were able to do in the Ranger Regiment. And when I looked up at the foreign policy that we had as a country, we didn't really have like a clear vision of what we were going to do after the Cold War ended. And in a lot of ways, we still don't. And we had this period in the War on Terror, but that drug on for a long time without the kind of focus we needed. So definitely, for me, we just didn't know what to do with all the power that we had achieved but I had no idea what I would do. I mean, I thought I'd be a retired military guy. And so I got out and ultimately got into manufacturing, started my own company, went to Notre Dame for business school, and had built a group of small manufacturing companies. When John Boehner resigned as Speaker, he was my member of Congress.
Now, these are small companies. What I know about you, you had a sizable company. And doing what? What was your company doing?
Well, we had a couple small companies together, but combined they had about 240 people.
What were you doing? What were you manufacturing?
We had 2 metal stamping companies, an injection molding company, and a tooling business.
How did you get into that? How did you?
My dad had a tool and die shop, really a job shop, and they made robot bases. That was their biggest business. And then they had gotten production jobs. They had really 2 metal stamping presses that stayed booked, and they had 2 other presses. One was kind of a tryout press for metal stamping dies. And so this is going past people that don't know this industry very well. But, he had 20-some employees when I first got out of the Army, and I was going to go work for a bigger company. And when I first got out, he's like, well, if you're going to get out anyway, why don't you come work with me? And I was like, I don't know, Dad, family business, and this company is a Fortune 500 company, and they're offering me this much money. I don't know that you can pay that. He goes, I definitely can't pay that. He goes, but here's what we're up against. You should at least take a look, because he started the business when I was a senior in high school, so we didn't grow up around it. He was a shop foreman for like another tool and die shop.
Okay.
And so I hadn't been around it really. So I went through and toured it. And this is a real quote. The guy that was running the shop floor at the time, he goes, this was like Good Friday of 2000. He goes, quote, I think all them computers are a fad. And I was kind of looking at him, and I was like, wait. I was like, you mean like the .com bubble? Because that was in 1999, like the year before. Right. So a bit of history for folks out there. And I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, and he goes, no, all them computers and stuff. And I'm looking at him like, you mean like desktop computers? And he goes, yeah, and them CNCs too, which is a computer-controlled machining center. And I was like, oh, okay. And I think that was really decisive when I decided to go work with my dad. And I was like, well, I don't truly know that I'll even like business. Why not try to help my dad for a year or so? So I worked with him directly for a year, 2 years, and then 2 years in, I started my own company and then went to business school.
And you replaced John Boehner. So that must have been something, replacing the former speaker.
Well, thankfully, I didn't replace the speaker. Mike Johnson's living that torment right now. Paul Ryan lived that torment. We've had 3 people as Republicans live that torment. I just got the good job, which is the member of Congress, and
Jim Jordan came to you and said,
yeah, I mean, he was at the time trying to build what became the Freedom Fund.
Jim Jordan's from Ohio.
Jim lives like half hour away from me, and he was raising money for the Freedom Fund. He stopped into my office.
The initial startup of Freedom Caucus had just began with Mark Meadows and Jim Bridenstine from Oklahoma. Keep going. Yeah,
so you got it. And right then he's asking me to, cut a check and raise money for the cause. And I'm like, I love the idea. Count me in. And he goes, well, hey, who are you going to back to replace Boehner? And I'm like, you, Jim Jordan. Who are you going to back? I'll probably be behind whoever you back. And isn't that kind of the point of this fund anyway? And he goes, yeah, it'd be great if there was an Army Ranger business guy in the race. And we just laughed. And I think really he's just buttering me up to get me to write a bigger check or something. And I went home and told my wife about my day, and I thought she would laugh. And she goes, well, what'd you tell him? I said, we laughed because it's crazy. And she goes, no, it's not. You'd be great at that. You should call him back. And I was like, let's go over the crazy. But obviously, ultimately, we got in. And when I got in, I mean, like, you couldn't have been more politically green than me to win a race. I mean, the young lady did the marketing for me in my business. She had an outside business. I said, what do you think? And she's like, well, I never even worked on a political campaign, and I'm a libertarian, not a Republican. But it's like launching a product. I said, okay, let's look at it like we're launching a product. Everybody needs to know about it and hopefully like it. How much money will that take? You do your study, I'll do mine. We'll compare notes. And so we compared notes. It kind of made sense. We prayed a lot about it, came up with a game plan, and did it like a product launch. And I used to tell the story to my friends and supporters. When we prayed about it, we felt like this is what we really should do. And it felt like, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you're supposed to get in the furnace, but you don't know whether you're going to come out.
Right.
And so when I first won, I thought, we made it out of the furnace. And now that I've been here, I'm like, I might still be in the furnace.
Yeah.
It's pretty rough.
Well, to jump into that, like, you're known within the conference as one of the intellectuals, somebody to look to on, as a subject matter expert on a number of issues. And so we could dive into some of those, but one of them, the first time I ever met you or saw you, I was attending a conference. I think it was Club for Growth, and you were speaking about digital currency at that time, and you blew my mind how in depth and that you, because I understand Bitcoin, I understand blockchain. I've actually wrote software for Ethereum, but to be able to transact Ethereum. But you spoke with such authority, it impressed me.
Well, thanks. I can't write code for much of anything. There was one course I took in college, well, a couple, but that was one in chemistry that I said I'd never want to take another minute of this, and one was writing code. So when they say learn to code, I'm like, nah, I'm not going to do that. So much respect for that. It's definitely a niche, but central bank digital currency is that. It's programmable money. And look, for Christian friends and viewers, we get it. Revelation talks about money being corrupted from its proper use as a store of value and a means of exchange to a tool for coercion and control. And for the Lord of the Rings fan, I've compared this to one ring to rule them all, because it is the power of total coercion. You literally stand between anyone and their property. If it's a central bank, it's not just a bank, which is, frankly, once you put your money in a bank, you just have a claim to your money. It's no longer truly yours. They carry it as assets on their balance sheet. But when the government has it, truly the government serves as the filter directly between you and your net worth. So if you want to spend money, you could see how it would be abused, because in a central bank digital currency, if it's centrally managed, centrally controlled, central bank digital currency, which is what China's doing, then they can see every transaction, and then they can build and program filters around that. And that's exactly what China's doing. But here's the scary thing. There are over 100 countries around the world that are working on some form of central bank digital currency, including ours. In fact, the Federal Reserve is actively hiring people to write code to research central bank digital currency. They say,
wow.
Now, when I say write code, I'm like, that sounds like you're not researching anymore. It sounds like you're building.
You're writing, yeah.
And when I think about building, I think about evil. I think about the evil in Star Wars, another movie analogy.
Yeah, they're building the Death Star.
Well, we're going to let them build the Death Star as long as they promise not to turn it on. And let's not forget, the Death Star was only a demonstration case where they blew up the planet, right?
Right.
Because then you got this power. I mean, it is scary like that to me, because then the central government truly stands between you and your ability to spend money for any cause. They can put terms and conditions on it, like, well, you said critical things of Xi Jinping, so you get a lower social credit score. You can buy train tickets because you said, only these things, but you've been supportive. You can go, all over. You're free to roam about the country. And you look where it could go. You've used up your gasoline allocation, or say, for example, you've got an F-350, gas for use, $20 a gallon, and you've got a Prius or, an electric vehicle, and boy, you got a great set of social credit scores.
Yeah.
That's the way it could be abused, and every country's running this kind of a version.
The government has always figured out numerous ways to screw people out of their money. And this creates an innumerable number of more ways than anyone has ever conceived.
Yeah, well, only in sci-fi, right? I mean, and Scripture. We look at Revelation. I think the three of us as Scripture, and a lot of the viewers of y'all's podcast. But if you look at every dystopian fiction, 1984, Brave New World, Fahrenheit 411. There's always this corruption of money, and it's always depicted as evil. The question is, why would we tolerate our government doing this with our money? And they say, oh, well, we would have to go to Congress to get permission to establish it. But on the back end, they are establishing it, and they will now clarify, well, a retail CBDC. So for the retail, so what they're building out is with the biggest banks, only the biggest banks, they're building out kind of this back end architecture where they can settle amongst business clients and frankly anybody but an individual consumer. They're actively building it, and that's what they say is research. But I do believe it is a complete abuse of the authority, and this is one of the problems with the way the Federal Reserve is structured. They're not on appropriations. The Treasury is, and they have to cooperate. So we've got in the language that passed the House Appropriations Bill this year. a prohibition against designing, developing, or establishing a central bank digital currency. So unless they nail it up front, they couldn't redesign anything. They couldn't use any of the money. But the problem is that doesn't necessarily affect, what the Federal Reserve does. So we really need to, in my view, criminalize any of this kind of work on a central bank digital currency, because to me it is that dystopian. I mean, it is that kind of a threat. To me, I think the corruption of our money system is an existential threat to Western civilization.
So you're on financial services,
Yes.
which is the proper committee for any pushback on this. From some minimal understanding of the makeup of that committee, chairmanship on down, pretty safe to say, even among Republicans, there's a heavy amount of skepticism and pushback against the Biden administration's design, the Federal Reserve's design to do this research. I think Republicans, and maybe I'm overspeaking in excess of what the reality is, but I see that on the Republican conference, there's a lot of solidarity wanting to push back against this. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And in our committee, we passed a bill. The whip, Tom Emmers, led the bill. A lot of us had input. We had variations on several bills, and Tom Emmers became the lead bill. And it's an anti-central bank digital currency piece of legislation, not just a hook on appropriations, but a pure appropriations, a full authorizing
And
committee.
this is Tom Emmers' bill.
Yeah, Tom Emmers' bill. It's a great bill, and it passed our committee. Not unanimously, though. All the Republicans were for it, and I think we had 5 or 6 Democrats who came out for the bill in committee. And if you look, the block of opposition is coming from Senator Elizabeth Warren in the Senate. Senator Sherrod Brown, the head of the Senate Banking Committee, is backing Elizabeth Warren. Schumer doesn't really know what's going on. But the good news is they're not actively moving pro stuff in the Senate, but Elizabeth Warren is running kind of a lot of the staffing and personnel. So anybody that needs appointed and Senate confirmed in the financial services space basically has to get Elizabeth Warren's blessing to be able to make it through the Senate confirmation process. And she's had a grip on this, and she is pro central bank digital currency. Wow. So the administration has taken that position. So the anti-CBDC legislation that we've got doesn't have a clear legislative path.
Yeah.
At this time.
Yeah.
All the way to the finish line at this time.
Republicans take the Senate, Republican White House. What do you think happens? Do you think this becomes a priority?
Well, I certainly hope so. I will say that, Secretary Mnuchin wasn't very good on this issue. Some of the work that was underway when Secretary Mnuchin was Secretary of the Treasury. So I would hate to see him become Secretary of Treasury again. We need somebody who's super strong on this. And, there are a lot of good, strong people on the issue. Secretary Mnuchin wasn't. I won't know that President Trump spent a lot of energy on it, frankly. But the hope is that President Trump or DeSantis has been very strong on this. In the unlikely probability that that President Trump isn't our nominee, let's say DeSantis was, he banned CBDC in the state of Florida. So I think on a lot of policy grounds, you just look at what Florida has done. Yeah, we should pretty much just do that, and we'd be in good shape in a lot of federal
And the
cases.
Emmer bill is a prohibition to stop it before it could ever get started. That's the real
Well, to stop
key.
it in terms of what it's been done so far, yeah. And it doesn't quite go as far as what we could do in terms of the Federal Reserve, but it goes as far as we could pass and get bipartisan support.
What I find that's a real value that you have is that whenever we have conference meetings and whenever there's an opportunity for members to go to the microphones, for those viewers, we're imagine a room in the basement of the Capitol where there's 220 Republicans, usually 190 because some of them don't show up. But we're all sitting in this room with leadership in front. And when leadership is done bloviating, then they give opportunities for members to come to the microphone. And at that moment, it becomes like a battle of wills. It becomes sometimes there's a contentious issue. And I'm interested in your thoughts on how do you navigate, testing the temperature of the room. Because I think it's an art where you feel the temperature of the room and you know the right words to say to the audience.
Well, I'm still trying to figure that out. So if you guys figure it out, let me know.
I think what he's saying, I've witnessed it. I've watched you do that a lot. I thought you've been very artful in the way that you are able to jump the shark in a way that before the shark knows that he's getting jumped.
Well, sometimes I think it's gone well, and sometimes you just get so energized. Like earlier tonight, I couldn't even see straight because one of our colleagues was saying things that were, frankly, on Adam Schiff level of mischaracterization of the truth. which is polite as I
Pfizer,
can phrase
bunch
it.
of
that's
Pfizer-
a
Pfizer
pretty high level.
authorization.
Which is like, oh man, you're not honestly representing what's going on in this debate about FISA. And so I think other times maybe I've been more effective, but I do think it's important to speak out sometimes and not necessarily always. Because if you're always the person at the mic, then people kind of tune out the people that always go.
Don't go to your neighbor's house too often, lest he grow tired of you.
Scripture, this man knows it.
Yeah, I mean, that's that thought, right?
Yeah.
You've got to know when to hold them and know when to
Yeah,
fold them.
there's
That wasn't
certain-
scripture, that was Kenny Rogers.
There's certain members that when they go to the microphone, you can see the entire room check out because they go to the microphone every time.
Yeah. So I think that's part of the balance, and we hope to get it right. And then just the agenda. Sometimes you're like, well, this issue is the highest show I've worked on. This issue you might be like in a 2 or 3 month period where you end up with a lot of time at the mic, and then over the next 6 months you're like, I hadn't even been to the mic. So it kind of depends. We've had a lot of those over the past since September with everything. A lot of times where everybody's spent a fair bit of time talking. We've worked through a lot as a conference. Hopefully, we're in a strong enough place so that in the year ahead we actually play a little better offense.
So for those that, for the viewers, you've been described as Frodo, or no, sorry, Samwise to Frodo Baggins, right? That
Are we in the speakers? Are we in the speakers election?
I got you.
Comes
Yeah.
in the
Speakers election
speakers
with Jim
race.
Jordan.
Oh, yeah.
So-
Describe to them your role.
So so you had that role. You have Jim Jordan, who was at
The guy trying to be the ring bearer.
Right,
He's the guy
trying to be-
he's carrying the weight of the world, trying to find a way to bridge the
bridge the gap.
real factions within our conference.
Jim's
right?
running for speaker. It was you were trying to help him get there.
And Jim asked me to help him.
Yep.
And Jim's not just one of my best friends in Congress, he's one of my best friends, and I mean, I shared earlier how I even got into this mess. And so,
he's Meshach. He brought you into the fire, right?
yeah.
Well, that has to be eye-opening to be in the internal structure of a speaker fight.
I learned a ton in that, and you build relationships across the conference. Some of them improve, some of them get worse, but it was definitely a fight, and it was disappointing to see Jim not be able to get the votes, and then to really look at the layers. I always tell people this place is like an onion. There's the superficial layer that I think everybody back home gets, which is, this is way too much like junior high. Everyone cares which lunch table they sit at. It's all petty, and it's like student council elections back in 9th grade or something.
Yeah.
And there's some of that. There's some of that level. Thankfully, there's a few more layers to the onion, and I've been at this 7.5 years now, and I'm still peeling back layers. And so as you look at some of these things, obviously it's broken. I mean, that's why we ran. All the people in Freedom Caucus, they didn't come here to be here. They came here to change here.
That's right.
And so 7.5 years in, you know that it's broken when you came, and with this much time here, it's just broken a little differently than I think people see. And I think that's part of the benefit of experience. But, you get the young bucks come in, they got all the energy, and they don't always listen to the old bulls. And I guess at 7.5 years, I'm beyond the mean. The average in the place is only about 6 years. Now, people like Nancy Pelosi skew that average by a lot.
Right.
But yeah, the average is, when I was wow, the average is like 6 years. So think how bad some of these long-term people skew that average.
Well, but if the freshmen like us didn't have somebody to look up to watch, how would we become effective, right?
You guys are all smart, experienced guys, and I mean, I think the energy that comes in is great. It's just sometimes it's been like, whoa, let's think through this, because there's a couple layers there that aren't entirely intuitive, and I found out a few extra of those during that speaker fight. I guess that's my point, in that you just kind of get in the room and you're like, oh, okay, I see what's here. And frankly, a lot of that ultimately really was, although it had superficial layers that were meaningful and different, a lot of the fight for speaker was still just a proxy war between Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise.
It was.
Yeah.
I think, and people didn't realize that until it was over.
There are people that even now don't even concede that, and it's like, you still don't get that?
Yeah.
But I think at this point, virtually everybody in the conference is like, yeah, man, those guys could have just locked themselves in a room and saved us a lot of heartache.
Right. It was brutal.
Because they both had a big enough block to kind of shank the other candidate, right? And that kind of continued. But it was sort of almost, it was pretty impressive how, like, once we kind of got to Mike Johnson, everybody just kind of almost supernaturally, got mellowed out and like, oh.
Yeah.
all the bitterness and anger and previous
Yeah.
fights, everybody just kind of mellowed out and go, well, I could go with Mike.
So you remember
I could live with Mike.
So you were running point for Jim. Do you remember what I told you when you called me to say, can you support Jim? I told you, do you remember the term I used, east of Jordan? Do you remember me telling you that?
Yeah.
Because I'd been on the plane and I was praying when we got back. And I think it's like 1 Kings 5, like it just jumped off the page to me, east of Jordan. So when Jim calls me, I'd already told you that. I'm like, look, I'm praying this thing through. And Jim was like, well, Louisiana's not east of Ohio, right? And I'm like, look, just give me some time to pray about this. I said, this thing just leapt off the page, and I read that east of Jordan. I went back and looked in my Bible about that. You know what the word east is a translation for? The word before. And so when this thing was all over with, when I went back and I looked, I had a friend of mine, Terry Allen. He said, well, where's Johnson relative to Jordan in the role? He's just before.
Oh, yeah.
Johnson.
Oh, that's pretty wild.
So you remember me telling you?
I don't know about that stuff.
I'm telling you. I told Jim, and I told Warren.
I'm one of those people that you can see anything if you look in the clouds enough, right?
Oh, man, Job 33:14, for God speaks one way, yet another, yet man may not perceive it. Did I not tell you that when you called me?
Those are words you said.
East of Jordan. And my buddy, I wasn't smart to figure it out. But when you go back and look, east in the Greek, or not, wouldn't be the Greek, it'd be the Hebrew, it actually means before. And so in the roll call, it's right there before Jordan. Yeah. So I didn't see that until afterwards.
So tell us quickly about your family. When we go back home, hopefully at the end of this week, how are you going to spend your downtime?
Well, I got a 26-year-old girl and a 24-year-old boy. We just have 2 kids, and been married 28 years. So met my wife Lisa when she was on a mission trip in Ohio. There's a lot of heathens in Ohio. She had to reach us. she was helping.
She was evangelizing the
Well, she was actually setting up backyard Bible clubs and vacation Bible schools for small churches. And then my mom wanted me to go to her church. I wasn't a big fan of her church. She's like, well, we got a new pastor and everything. And we go there, and sure enough, I'm like, get in there, and there's this pretty girl up there on the by the pulpit, organizing some stuff and everything, kind of getting ready for something. I'm like, Mom, who's that? She goes, I don't know. I said, is that like the new pastor's daughter? So no, I haven't got there. Well, she sang special music. She sang a great song, People Need the Lord. And she's just smiling, beaming, and everything. I was like, man. And at the end, I got to walk past and shake her hand and say, hey, thanks for singing. And thought, not a bad day. Met a pretty girl. And
you're like, Mom, I want to go back to your church.
Well, I was leaving for West Point right after that. I thought, like, we had a couple other interactions, and I thought I had read, okay, well, I'm going to ask this girl out. And she's like, oh, I can't date. I'm on a mission trip. And I go, man, I totally read that wrong. And she goes, no, seriously, I can't. I would, I'm not going to cross my rules. But, we're doing this in groups. And, supernaturally, I felt led to help out with Vacation Bible School. So there I was with those kids, and so I helped out with that, and then we started actually dating formally, and but I had to leave, and after I left, we wrote letters, and this was pre-cell phone days, so I would wait in line for a payphone. She'd wait at home. I'd call her on like a weekend or Friday night or something, and then we'd have a little fun. Then we could have like real dates. She came out and lived at West Point my sophomore year. And we got engaged after that. You can't be married at West Point, so we got married about a month after graduation.
You cannot be married at West Point?
No.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Nope. So we got married about a month after I graduated, and been married 28 years, but we dated the whole way through West Point.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah, pretty cool. So how about you guys? You guys already told these stories to these folks?
Yeah. Well, I've got 2 teenage daughters, so any advice is always helpful. It's been trying.
Well, the mother-daughter dynamic is, that's always, they're the best of friends, and then they're like, especially in those 13, 14, those stretch of years, 4 or 5 years, and it all does mellow out eventually. And the boy, he was like the sweetest little mama's boy until he got like all the hormones running through him about 14, and then he's back mostly on track now. So he's kind of got some.
I'm right there. I've got the 17-year-old, about to turn 18-year-old daughter, and the just turned 13-year-old, and yeah. Plus, I've got an addition. I've got a 2-year-old who's homesick right now with some. So hopefully
good for you. That's pretty cool that you get a little bit of a spread, but you got another youngin. And, they're pretty awesome. So yeah, spend time with family, and who knows? We still aren't even gelling up our plans because. My son out in Colorado can't travel last year because he couldn't travel due to work, we ended up doing Christmas out there. We haven't yet decided whether we're going to do that or do something else. That's how.
No, there's worse places to do
Gumby.
Christmas.
Yeah.
Maybe do some snow skiing. And
I tried that once, and I determined that was not for me.
well, thanks for joining us,
Yeah.
and thank you for being such a conservative, someone who's an influence on the conservative movement, especially within Congress. Thank you for the fight that you bring here. We really appreciate
Indeed,
you.
Warren.
Yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
And before we let you go, if people want to follow you, where do they go?
Yeah, on Twitter at Warren Davidson, and then our official webpage is davidson.house.gov.
Awesome. Well, give Warren a like, and if you like the show and the conversation, be sure and like and subscribe and share it. The Fresh Freedom Podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Rumble. Make sure that you're subscribed. Until next time, we'll see you on the Fresh Freedom Podcast.